Welcome to Humane Voices. I am Kelly, your co-host, although today my co-host Carrie is not going to be able to join us, which is great for me. I get to shine solo without her. Although there's going to be a lot of shine today on our featured guests. We are going to be talking about volunteering, giving something back, devoting your time to something you love. And this is a timely conversation because National Volunteer Week it starts on April 16th. And we have a bona fide expert today to talk about all things volunteering, whether at HSUS or your local shelter or wherever you may devote your time, your passion, your talent. Hillary Hager is the Vice President of Outreach, Engagement, Training at the Humane Society of the United States. And that's a mighty big title there, Hillary. So I bet there's a lot that falls under your purview, but I know volunteering is one of the biggest areas that you work on for HSUS. So let's talk about volunteering, and thanks for joining us.
Yeah, happy to be here. I appreciate that. It's my sort of passion project, volunteer stuff. So I'm happy to have the opportunity at any time. You just let me know. I'm happy to talk about it.
That's great. And so not only are you an expert because this is what you do with your professional hat on, but you personally are an expert because of your many years experience volunteering for a variety of different organizations. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I have started volunteering. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I volunteered when I was younger and as a kid and through high school. But I also served as a Peace Corps volunteer, which is sort of the biggest kind of volunteer thing where you're heading off to parts unknown. I spent 2 years serving in Mongolia. I worked at a national park. And so I worked in national park. I taught at a secondary school and really loved it. And when I came back to the States afterwards, I was looking for employment. Not really sure what I was going to do after having lived in a yurt in the middle of nowhere in Mongolia, and saw a job listing as a volunteer manager. And I remember, because this is how I work, I remember thinking like, well, gosh, how hard could it be? I've been a volunteer. Surely I could be a volunteer manager. Not realizing that it's like a profession and people do it for their entire careers. So I got myself into this job and realized there was a lot I needed to learn. And so as I continued as a volunteer manager, I also continued as a volunteer. So I've done lots of different things as a foster parent for local shelters, but also doing wildlife rehab. There's a rehab center here close to where I live in Washington State with lots of really great species that I was able to get my hands on. I also served on the board of directors for chimpanzee sanctuary that's here in Washington State. Wow. And then until very recently, I was on the board of directors for our State Federation of Animal Care and Control Agencies. So volunteering has always been this is the first time actually in like 20 years that I'm not volunteering. I'm taking a little bit of a break before I decide what the next thing is, but it's something that I feel so strongly about personally, but so many people do. They really want to connect with their heart's work, or they found themselves in some sort of career that they didn't anticipate. Like they thought they were going to work with animals, and then they're, woke up one morning and they're an accountant and they're like, how did this happen? And I want to really get connected with animals or do this work that's really meaningful for me. And so to create the space for people to connect with their heart's work is like super satisfying for me. And it's the good stuff that I appreciate being able to do.
Yeah. And I want to give a shout out to obviously all of the listeners, viewers that volunteer, but also the volunteer managers, because like you said, I think volunteers think, oh, that must be pretty easy and wonderful to manage volunteers. And as someone that has also done that, it's really, really, it's a lot. It can be difficult. It can be extremely rewarding. So shout out to the volunteer managers and the volunteer professionals out there, because I mean, they're really doing incredible work because you have volunteers, but someone or some people have to know what to do with those volunteers. Like, how do you plug the person who says, this is my passion, my interest, my love, I want to serve in this capacity? There has to be those folks, those professionals that then plug you into that. And we're lucky. I know that those folks exist here. And Hillary, you could tell us, as well as anyone at the organization, how important are volunteers to the work we do in protecting animals?
Yeah. Well, I can't let your comment about volunteer managers go by without thanking you for saying that. And I mean, especially as a practitioner, I know you know the deal, but I think that's right. I mean, it takes a lot of project management and people skills and all of the things. And that's something that we've really emphasized at the Humane Society of the United States. And there is a professional association and a certification for certified volunteer administrators that most of the people who are involved in volunteer engagement at our organization have been certified in, because we wanted to really acknowledge the skill and expertise that's required in this profession. And so that's a value that we have placed, because we really do want to make sure that we are connecting people with meaningful experiences. And it's very frustrating. I'm sure many people among the listeners have had this desire to help, and then they don't know where to plug in, or they maybe get connected, but it's not really the thing that they want to do. And so it's really for us a conversation about understanding what our organizational needs are and how best we can plug people with their interests, experience, and skills into our work. And so I started at HSUS in 2011, and we had volunteers involved in various parts of the organization, but my role really was to kind of create the process and the structure, and to be much more strategic about how we plug volunteers in. And so what's great, I think, about our organization is that we have really a wide range of ways that people can plug in, right? So we have our animal rescue team. We have a care and rehabilitation center where we deploy volunteers where they can have direct care with the animals. We also will sometimes stand up temporary shelters and need to deploy people there to provide animal care. We have Black Beauty Ranch in Texas, where volunteers help with providing care to the animals in the sanctuary. So we have all of those pieces, and that represents a significant number of the volunteers that engage with us every year. But we also do a lot of work on policy, right? We want to sort of prevent cruelty to animals before it starts and get at the root causes. And a lot of that's related to policy. And so one of the other really big programs that we have here in the organization is our Humane Policy Volunteer Leader Program. And that is one where we are training volunteers on our issues and how to be effective advocates, and giving them the skills and wherewithal to be able to be effective in their own community on the issues that really matter to them. And then on top of that, we have all kinds of other programs where we're really connecting, identifying our program staff's needs and the goals that they have in their programs and the things they're trying to achieve, and then finding people with the right skills to support them in their work and help lighten the load. Many hands make light work. So there are all kinds of different ways, but we just have thousands of people for providing tens of thousands of hours every year. And it's super inspiring for us to see. It's the best.
So there's one I want to touch upon that. So some of the volunteer opportunities and work that happens, just everyday folks across the country, and even with our family of organizations, our international affiliate, there's obviously the things we think of, the rescue things. You mentioned policy, folks to get involved locally on issues, which I think is great. Talk a little bit about, all of those opportunities, like how does that translate into, if you could quantify, like what are the hours people are serving just at our organization to protect animals?
Yeah, well, in 2021, it was something like 1,600, almost 1,700 volunteers and 50,000 hours of time.
Wow.
And that number varies from year to year based on how many people we're deploying in the animal rescue team. Years when we have more deployments, we need more volunteer support. That equals more people doing the work for us. But I think from our perspective, it's really about weaving the concept of volunteers and the benefit and the impact of volunteers into our strategy, acknowledging we're a large organization. We have a lot of subject matter experts. We have a lot of people who are really good at their jobs. And what we know about animals is there's always more to do, right? There's so many different elements. There's so much more work that we recognize could be done, that we're trying to really maximize the work we do. And that means getting more help. And so what we really think about, and you mentioned earlier, volunteer engagement is a part of what I do, but all of what we do in outreach, engagement, and training is about relationship building and understanding stakeholders and building really reciprocal relationships, understanding the animal shelter community so that we can learn from them and then also provide resources to them. Same with law enforcement community, and the same with our veterinary professional associate. So we're always listening and learning. And so what we are doing also is listening to what animal advocates are interested in doing in their communities, plugging them into what we're doing, and skill building so that they actually can take those skills with them, with or without our involvement, right? Like it's a training ground in a way that I think really helps people. A lot of times I hear, one of the other things I do is teach compassion fatigue workshops, right? And one of the things that I hear a lot from people is feeling really helpless or overwhelmed or like, oh my gosh, there are so many problems and I don't know where to start. And it
Right.
seems so much bigger than something that I can do. And so this breaks things down into really manageable chunks that people can take on, can be successful in, can learn the skills about. And it just feels, I think, not only great in the short term to be of service, but also part of this bigger movement that we're all a part of to try to make the world a more humane place. And so sort of the fellowship that comes with that and the connection with other like-minded people seems to be a really important factor for our volunteers. And it really helps us feel like, we are part of the army of the kind because we're working arm in arm with all of these really great advocates across the country.
Well, and some of those volunteers, kind of those that army, the soldiers out there. I mean, there's obviously those working on a rescue mission, but you could also volunteer from home, right? And I think
Yeah.
we learned so much, certainly during the pandemic and COVID. Yes. But it seems like organizations, and ours is no different. I mean, we've really not pivoted, but expanded, how work can be done. And that also impacts volunteers. Share a little bit maybe about that too.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly you're absolutely right. The entire world had to pivot. And in many cases, I think HSUS, I mean, certainly we have our direct care. We had places where volunteers were sort of congregating to volunteer together. But one of the most important pieces is because we are a national and international organization and have a very diffuse group of people working on all kinds of things in all kinds of places, it really just takes a little bit of creative thinking to connect people in their communities to the work that's already happening. And so, we have our state affairs program, our state affairs department, where we have state directors and upwards of 30 states around the country who are working, not only supporting the federal work that we do, but also really digging into the local and state level work. And of course, that's where people live, right? Like there's almost any community where we have advocates, there's some work that we are doing at HSUS that will make a difference for animals in those communities. And so that's the really beautiful part of it, whether they are, whether we have volunteers who are helping with phone banking to contact HSUS supporters to urge them to be in touch with their legislators on a particular issue, or if they are, advocating in their community for some sort of ordinance change for humane pet store bills or fur sales bans or whatever the thing is. There are things that are really micro located. So it's not just me thinking about how I can be of service to some other person across the country. It's really me connecting with the network in my community to take action on the things that are most important to me. And I think we've really helped people connect with the policy element of it, because I would say, I think a lot of times people, when they think about volunteering with an animal organization, they really do focus on that direct care piece. But in many ways, there's something that's already kind of gone wrong for an animal's life if they are requiring our intervention and care, right? So we really are trying to get to the root cause. And so I think helping to draw those connections for people so they understand that the policy piece, if we're able to really sort of enact humane laws that work to benefit animals, that it will eliminate or at least ameliorate the need for our interventions on an emergency basis down the road. So it's great to see people learning and then feeling empowered to take that on. It's very cool.
Well, and I know firsthand, not only through, and I actually got connected to Humane Society of the United States as a volunteer when we had a program some years back. So I know this firsthand, but I think this is true. I would say probably of any nonprofit. I absolutely know it's true for the Humane Society of the US that any of the wins that we have, the victories, when we read Kitty's blog and it highlights this just happened, or, some policy win or any of our victories, that those don't happen without volunteers. I mean, you can take some of the, some of our colleagues or some of our work out of it. But if you take the volunteer component out of these victories, they just don't happen. I mean, it really does come down to, I think, those local communities, whether it's someone, engaging with their local city council member or their mayor, or certainly their legislator, because they are a constituent in that district. So, they have to listen to them. So I've always, I think, known that if you take volunteers out of whatever the effort is, the win just does not happen. I mean, that to me is how critical volunteers are. And it seems like at HSUS, that's absolutely true.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's because, the majority of people in this country value animals and are by their nature, concerned and compassionate people who want the animals to be done right by. And so really we're just, we're connecting them with the sort of the feelings they already have and helping them to direct it in a particular way. And so what legislators need to hear and what decision makers need to hear is that it's not just a one or two person, sort of pet project that somebody's working on. It's really like the majority of constituents in some of these districts really care about this stuff. And so, they legislators work for us as citizens, they're constituents. And so it's important that they hear from us. And so for us to be able to really skill build and make sure that our advocates are super knowledgeable about the things that they're working on, and then also really skilled advocates and can know what steps need to be taken in order to help us with those things, it really just amplifies our ability to be effective in a gazillion ways. And I think you're right. Like we have to, it's both. It's both, and it's having the staff who are doing it and having the support of volunteers. I mean, we could never do the animal rescues that we do. We don't have enough staff to provide care to all those animals. We have to have volunteers do it. It's just not even negotiable.
Well, and this is kind of the time of the year, and with National Volunteer Week kicking off, where my hunch is most of our listeners probably volunteer somewhere already. But especially for those that maybe don't yet, but they think, oh, I do want to volunteer. This seems like something I could do. The National Volunteer Week, it's put together by Points of Light Foundation, I think, right? Can you share a little bit about Points of Light?
Yeah. Well, Points of Light is it is an organization that was founded by the first President Bush to really promote civic engagement. And so it has focused both on sort of increasing the capacity of organizations to successfully engage volunteers, but also to really point people toward all of the opportunities that are out there and available, and to get people connected. And I think about this a lot because I think, especially after the last few years with the pandemic, a lot of local organizations were really profoundly impacted by their ability to have volunteers come in. They were limiting staff and having shifts of people who work together. So they really had to be very creative in a very short period of time to figure out how they could continue to keep volunteers engaged. And now most organizations are back up and running. They're looking to have people in the building. And so I know that in local organizations, there's still a little bit of a lag with getting people back in the building. And I think when people ask me about what they should do and how they can best plug in, I always am, I really encourage people to think about what it is that they themselves are looking for. Like, is it, are you just looking for a pat on the back for like doing a good thing? Well, that's one thing, but are you looking for skill building? Are you looking for connection? Are you looking, like, is the mission of the organization the most important piece? Are you looking for a place that you can, sort of dedicate your particular talent that you might have? Like if you're a CPA and you're like, well, I'm sure there's an organization that could use a volunteer accountant. Like maybe, there are all kinds of different ways. So I think it's really important that people do some reflection about what their actual goals are, and then connect with organizations to make sure that the organizations that they're interested in have that need, right? Like the magic happens where the organization's need and the person's primary motivating factor match. And there's all kinds of different ways that can look. And lots of organizations, I think, as a result of the pandemic, and just because it's strategic, have really opened up their, or are more considerate of and flexible in the ways that they're plugging people in. Because it used to be that, you had somebody who had to be at the building 5 hours every Monday for like forever. And most people don't have that up, they don't have the flexibility to do that as lives have changed and circumstances have changed. And so many organizations are looking at like, what's the best model? Like, what's the commitment that we want people to make? Like, how frequently do we need people? Do they need to come into the building? Can they do it from home? And so I think that's the really good news, is that, it's sort of forced innovation, but now I think it was hard when organizations were making that pivot, but boy, now they're really good at it. And so prospective volunteers can really consider, like, how much time, what do I want to do? What do I want this to look like? And really, for almost any sort of set of conditions they're looking for, it's likely they'll be able to find it out there in the community, whether it's in a local animal organization or in human services or whatever kind of NGO they're interested in.
And I think that's a key point, because for folks that maybe haven't, kind of cut their teeth on volunteering or done that, they can think, oh, this is daunting. Like, I'm so afraid to commit myself because everyone's busy, raising families and working and taking care of the animals and, all of the things we do. And as I think people have gotten busier, But that's really important that, volunteering doesn't always mean, there are people that volunteer like it's their job, and
Mhm.
bless them, they're needed. But it could be several hours here and there. It could be a one off. Maybe it's a
Mhm.
specific project. I mean, I think that's important for folks to know that you can, volunteering and that opportunity can meet you where you're at too.
Yes.
And maybe it is
Yes.
work from home. Maybe it is less
Yep.
hours. Maybe it is something where, the whole family can be involved. I mean, there's so many different opportunities out there. If you can talk to that a little, but also, and you touched on this, we obviously volunteer because we want to do good. We want to help. But anyone that has ever volunteered more than an hour will soon learn it starts to feel like a very selfish endeavor, because we often get so much out of it, whether it's just feeling good, but there's other things we get out of it. You mentioned skill set, maybe you'll learn developmental tools. Talk a little bit about that as well.
Yeah. Well, so the first thing I would say in terms of the angst that people might have in taking that step, the first thing I would say is, most organizations are very thoughtful about the skill level that they require of volunteers. So like, they would say, we're looking for a CPA, so that you, who is not a CPA, would probably not apply for a job as a CPA. So, and I think, one of the things that I always think about is that, like, I'm primarily motivated by a desire to not look foolish when I try something for the first time. And so I will actually spend a lot of time like, do I think I'm going to be able to be successful in this or not? And so, like, the good news is I have a pretty inflated sense of things that I think I'm going to be able to be okay at, or at least I don't mind looking foolish if I do it. But there are other things where I'm like, I'm never like learning how to play bridge. Like I love playing cards. I love learning new things, but I am never, ever, ever going to play bridge because it seems like it's really hard and you feel really dumb.
Yeah.
For the
You
first
just need to
while.
find a Go Fish club, or maybe like a little Old Maid club. Keep
Yeah,
it,
baby steps.
keep it
That's
light.
fine. It's
Yes.
fine.
Yes.
So I think that is a concern. I think a lot of times people are like, oh, I don't want to do something wrong, or I don't want to get it. I don't want to
Yeah.
look bad. And so what I just want to acknowledge that for people who sometimes like me have that fear is that most organizations recognize that, and they create a space for people who walk in having no idea what they're doing. So it's never going to be one of those scenarios where you have to like fake it and be like, oh, I think this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I have no idea.
Yeah.
And I could make things worse somehow. So I just want to allay that concern that people might have. But, I think in terms of the
And
benefit.
Hillary, I
Oh,
want
yeah.
to stop you right there. One
Yeah.
thing I'm thinking is that I think too, introverts often are a little nervous about volunteering. And I always think back to, I was working on a political campaign, and there was a volunteer who really loved this candidate and wanted to be a part of it, but did not want to be around people, which meant no mailing parties. No, at the time we used to do mailing parties, calls. And I thought, well, yard signs, we need like 2,000 assembled. And this volunteer I've never forgotten him, would come in the basement of the office late at night and put together yard signs, which no one else wanted to do.
Yes.
And that was his contribution. And every time he saw a yard sign, he knew I was a part of that. And the candidate won. And he was a part of that. And I always think about that for the introverts, that there is something for everyone.
Yes. Yes. I'm so glad you said that, because, and actually a lot of people who run the volunteer programs at HSUS are introverts themselves. And so I think we have that bias towards wanting to be really inclusive. And I think actually all of us are trying to be more aware. I mean, as an extrovert, I spent a lot of time trying to really create space for introverts in my life, and to acknowledge that people have different preferences than I do. But I think that piece is absolutely right. People have different motivations. I mean, sometimes people want to be leaders. Sometimes people just want to be appreciated. Other people just want to put their head down, do the work, never be acknowledged for it. And it's so essential that, and I think organizations have gotten a lot more savvy about creating different ways for different types of people to plug in that way. And I think that's huge. I think also in terms of benefits, there are health benefits. I mean, there's research actually that indicates that there are health benefits for people who are involved and who stay connected in their communities. And like I have always said, in thinking about recording this webinar, like, yeah, absolutely, I would want people to come and connect with HSUS. Like, we're always looking for volunteers. We always could use more people. We really care about our supporters and want them involved in our work. But also, what's really most important is that people find the thing that connects with whatever sparks in them, right? And we don't have every opportunity in the world. There are lots of other organizations in the world. And so, sometimes people are like, well, don't you just want to tell them to come to volunteer here? And I'm like, yeah, if that's the right fit, like, yes, absolutely. Come on down. But what's most important is that people connect with the thing, whatever that thing is. And, and I have met volunteers, in most roles, there's like a minimum commitment. And I know I have a friend actually who's been dog walking at my local shelter here for more than 20 years, every Thursday. It's just what she does. And she was there before I started working there. She's still there now every Thursday, and it's a part of her community. It's part of what she does. She prioritizes it in her life. And
probably a part of her identity. That is as important to her as, maybe her other life.
Yeah. Everybody knows that's what she does. And she's like the best advertising, really, because she, because it's like a part of breathing for her. And I'm always so impressed. She's still every Thursday, and will, and forever, I'm sure. And so, people can build connections with others, like I said, with like-minded people. Sometimes animal advocacy can feel a little isolating. If, I've heard from people that like they have this real concern for animals and not everybody in their life shares that concern. And so they sometimes can feel like an oddball, even though generally, as I said,
most kind of finding your tribe.
Yes.
That's how you find your tribe. Yeah.
Yeah. And so this is an opportunity to be with other people who get it, who are like, yeah, I care too. And I want to, I want to put my money where my mouth is. I want to put my energy and my talents to this effort. But then there is that skill building, right? So sometimes it is like learning a new technology system. Sometimes it's learning a new program. We, at HSUS with our Humane Policy Volunteer Leader Program, we do a really deep dive to help people to understand the issues and the context within which we're working and what we're trying to do. And so that we spend a lot of time educating people. It's like a boot camp for advocates, so they can learn all these various issues and be introduced to all of the work. And then from among all of those things, find their sort of passion project that they really want to dive into and connect with other advocates, connect with their state director to help really give them the skills or give them the support that they need in order to be successful. And they're not doing it alone, right? Because there's this whole network of hundreds of people also in it with you. It's pretty great. And there's mentorships, there's opportunities for people to get a little hand holding where they need it from other volunteers who have been there. And it's really great. And people, I hear all the time say, and this is the best part, like I came because I cared about the animals, but I stay because of the people. And I love that so much because it can be very lonely sometimes. Right. Yeah. And this is an opportunity to hang out with, and I say this with all due modesty, a bunch of really cool people. We have a bunch of really cool people we get to spend time with. That's why I'm here all of these years later, right?
Truth.
Except for you, Kelly. No, just kidding. Just kidding.
And that's the end of our, no.
Oh, look at the time. That's right.
Yeah, no. And it's, I've never heard anyone that's volunteered where it was a, good match or have given of their time to their passion. I've never heard anyone say, gosh, I wish I wouldn't have given my time to my passion and make a difference. And, it just does not happen. And I think I also do want to mention, if you're volunteering somewhere and you decide this isn't the place for me, pivot, volunteer elsewhere.
Yeah. Well, and yes. And what I would also add to that is talk to your volunteer manager, because I think they don't want you to, nobody wants people to like do what they hate. Right. And so what I would always say to volunteers in the programs I ran is to say like, I want your time in this organization to be like the highlight of your week. I want you to spend your whole week going like, oh, it's almost Thursday. I can't wait. This is going to be the greatest. Yeah. And if you're not relating to your commitment in a way that has you feel really jazzed and super excited to come, then I want to hear from you. Because it's possible that this isn't the right fit and that there's another way that we can really connect you. I would never want you to just feel like, oh, I guess I'll do this minimum until I'm finally done with this minimum commitment and I can go find something else. Like, I really believe that there's an opportunity.
Yeah, a good volunteer is a happy volunteer for sure. Yeah. And while we want all of you listeners and viewers, we want you to volunteer wherever it is, whatever your, just fills you up, by all means do it. And if you're interested in volunteering with us, we have, as Hillary shared earlier, so many different opportunities. And I know we can always use really passionate folks that want to protect animals. So Hillary, we've got those folks out there. They're like, National Volunteer Week is coming
We're
up.
very
I need to get on
compelling.
board with the cool kids.
Yep.
So, which, as you said, is us.
Yep.
How do they get involved? How do they plug in if they want to put their time and their talent to work for animals with the Humane Society?
Well, I'm so glad you asked.
I bet you have a website or something to share.
The best and easiest way is to go to humanesociety.org/volunteer. And so, to your point that you made earlier, like what we have tried to do is to really to present the information in such a way to help people to understand what all would be involved. So that if there is like with the animal rescue team, we would be asking people to deploy to wherever it is that we have our temporary shelter or rehab center. So that it requires travel. But if it's something that people can do from their home, or if it's at a specific location, all of that is sort of designated there. And the sort of the principle that we operate on here is like, ask for what you want in hopes you might get it, right? If we feel like it's so important for the match to be good out of the gate, it just makes sense from our perspective to be very upfront, to like let people know, like, hey, here's what you're here's what you might be signing up for. So we have position descriptions. Great. We talk about time requirements. And so we try to be very upfront so people can really be thoughtful about what they think is going to be the right thing for them. And they can, sort by state to find the things that are available to them, either at a site in their state or that could be done remotely from anywhere. And so that humanesociety.org/volunteer page is the best place to start. And there's all kinds of information there. Yeah.
That's awesome. All right. Well, we're going to expect the website now to blow up with everybody going to it. humanesociety.org/volunteer. And Hillary, this was I'm really appreciative of your time and a great conversation, because I know we both love to talk about volunteering. And thank you to all of our many, many volunteers that are listening out there. We absolutely could not do this work without you. So Hillary, thanks so much for joining us today, and
very welcome.
We'll see you all next time.
Yep. Thanks, everybody. Glad to be here.